I'm Dean Jones, President and CEO of Realogic Sotheby's International Realty, and this is Market Perspectives. Today, I have a very special guest. He's been in my life, my entire life, my father, Trevor Jones. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We've been in business, we've been in family, but I really want to start with you, going way back. You're a mentor of mine. You've obviously been a very successful entrepreneur as a developer, an investor, and now as a philanthropic interest. But how did this all start? When was your first entrepreneurial move, would you say?
Probably the first one was when I was 7 years old. I realized there was a baseball game going on every certain day of the week, and I decided to sell popcorn there. So I would pop popcorn, take little bags up, and walk around and sell them. And after I sold the popcorn out, kind of went, what do I do now? I've got lots of time. So I went to a corner store close and bought ice cream bars.
Okay.
Basically doubled the price and took them and sold them quickly. So after I did this about 3 or 4 weeks, the owner of the store said, well, why are you buying all these ice cream bars? What are you doing with them? And I said, well, I take them to the park, baseball park, and double the price and sell them. He said, oh, okay. So next week I went there to buy the ice cream bars. He wouldn't sell them to me. He was paying somebody else to double the price, so he got the money. Anyway, I learned something about competition at that time.
I guess you don't share all your trade secrets any longer with your vendors, do you? So now you're 7 years old doing that. And what about in your teenage years? What were you doing then? You were working in a lumber mill, were you not?
No, that was when I was going to university. I started working lumber. No, my teenage years I worked in a grocery store.
That's right. I did too. I think I caught that bug from you. Little union job to keep you fresh, right? So tell me about your education. So you got through high school, and to put this in context, this is in East Vancouver, British Columbia. So this is all in Vancouver, Lower Mainland area, right?
Correct. Got
yourself into college. Where'd you go and what were you studying?
I went to the University of British Columbia and took industrial education teacher training to be an industrial education teacher.
So what would that include, like math and woodworking and metalworking and?
Correct. And architectural design and different things like that, yes.
So would that be your entree into real estate development?
Yeah, I kind of liked working with my hands. I made furniture and that for our own use, and kind of liked designing homes. And after I started teaching, got into sort of real estate things. In fact, I remember it was when we first got married, which I was 23, we were looking at building a new house, looking at buying a building lot.
Right.
And I went, the building lot's X dollars, but if I can just go just out of the city, I can get like 8 acres for about the same price. So I went to City Hall there and said, well, what's the future for this acreage? And they said, well, sometime it'll be able to be subdivided. So I went, this is probably a good
Was that blueberry farm you had on Granville Street in Richmond?
That's right. It's kind of interesting because we ended up buying it, and the first thing I did was I couldn't subdivide the whole thing, but I could subdivide 2 lots off. By the time I subdivided 2 lots off, it paid for almost the whole 8 acres, and there was almost 7 acres left. And you're right, Dean, it was blueberry areas and had a lot of white birch trees. So I thought, these are kind of popular, very pretty white birch trees, and people like blueberries. So I put a big shovel, you dig, and they come and dig up the blueberries and plant them, or the white birch. And we also had a lot of pine trees. They didn't tend to be big, so pretty easy to dig. So I did that, and then after I did that, I went, well, maybe I can get some tax benefit of this. So I registered it as a tree farm and got big tax breaks, so I paid almost no property tax on it.
What year was this? And kind of
72.
And this is, okay, so this was a year before I was born. So you thought that was busy work. What about raising a family? That was all changing for you back then. So now we're in Richmond, British Columbia, which is south of Vancouver, in a tree farm / blueberry farm / principal residence. You built your home.
I built my first house there, new. And I built most of it myself too, because I remember I was taking industrial education courses, so I built staircases, I built kitchen cupboards, I built furniture, and I did all the finishing in the home.
I remember that distinctly. There was a lot of furniture that you built, Mom's sewing cabinet, and I think even the spindles on the staircase. There's a lot of arts and crafts in that home.
Yeah, there was. When I was 21, I moved to California, not on a student visa, but I moved there because of the weather, etc. Anyway, and I was going to take industrial education courses in California, but But I found out it would be a year quicker if I came back to British Columbia and took the course. I was coming back for 1 year, take the courses, and that's where I met Dixie. So she says, "You're not going anywhere, you're staying here." So anyway, I didn't end up going back to California. But what I did learn was that Corvette automobiles were very popular in Vancouver and very expensive, but hard to get. But they weren't cheap in California, but relatively cheap. So when I returned to Vancouver to go back to University of British Columbia, I bought a 58 Corvette and a 58 Thunderbird convertible and brought them back, and they were worth 2.5 times as much.
Okay.
And the Canadian dollar at that time was worth more money. I ended up bringing a few back. It was difficult to bring them into Canada unless you were returning student or person moving. But I had a few friends that were down there and coming back, so I had them bring the cars back.
You were always doing side hustles back then. I think it wasn't just the Thunderbirds or the Corvettes. You also had campers and small motorhomes and anything that would resell better at a higher price up in British Columbia versus the more wholesale market you saw down in Southern California and I think Arizona as well.
Correct.
So here you are in the early 70s, flogging cars on the side and cutting your teeth in real estate design and development. When did you sell that home? Because I'm trying to figure out when you figured it was time to leave your profession. At the time you were a school teacher.
And I taught industrial education, mostly architectural and mechanical drafting. The drafting had some courses in home design, etc. So I kind of decided that we would move out of Richmond back to Vancouver into quite a nice area called Shaughnessy, and older, very nice estate homes. So I bought one of those. I partly did it because I had young children, and there was a private club near which I really liked. So I got into Vancouver and started doing some things with another friend and partner, buying some real estate, building houses, renovating houses, and reselling them. Anyway, I got so busy at doing that, I ended up quitting teaching after 12 years.
So this was around late 70s, 1979, I think you incorporated T. Jones Enterprises?
As soon as I moved into Vancouver, which was about 7 or 8 years after I started teaching, I started doing some real estate investing, and my experience at making things, I could go in there and figure out some things you could do to the house to improve its looks, and bought them and resold them.
Yeah, you just had a knack. I mean, so you are a math teacher, so it didn't take you very long to figure out that it made more economic sense to be in development, even though very noble cause to be a teacher for certain, especially for high school. And from my perspective, I remember being trained, if you will, brought up in the family in, business acumen, in design and development. I know I cleaned a lot of showers and scrubbed a lot of hardwood floors for you. Literally never forget sitting in, sub-freezing drain tile with a Hilti gun, trying to strap some drain tile to the side of a concrete foundation. I mean, if that doesn't harden you up a little bit, I don't know what does, but.
That was when you were probably 15 or so?
I mean, I remember doing demo homes for you where you would be ripping down a home but try to sell majority of the parts, and it's a valiant effort to recycle, but I'm sure you were also interested in the other kind of green, which was what could I claim out of this home, and you can sell a lot of a house.
Yeah, we used to get a lot of money out of them, and it got rid of quite a bit of the items in the house, so when we tore them down it was less money to get rid of the refuse.
Yep.
It was kind of interesting because in Vancouver that time we never had rarely had a vacant lot. You pretty well had to tear down a home to build one.
Okay, so now we're full-time in development. You have a business partner who was a friend of yours. You're flipping houses, you're renovating, you got a few spec builds, but we're coming into the early 1980s, inflation, mortgage rates. I mean, what kind of environment are we talking about? And I mean, this is starting to ring a little familiar.
Well, I kind of hit it right when I started going full-time into real estate because prices were increasing, 20-25% a year.
Wow.
Real big demand for real estate. Literally, when a house was put for sale in about 79, 80, there would be a lineup out the front door for people to look and put offers in, and they all went for more than asking price.
Wow.
Then came along 1981, and interest rates went right through the roof, 18, 19, 20%, and the market just absolutely died. I had a situation where, just outside of Vancouver, people were taking duplexes in this place called Burnaby, just outside of Vancouver. The city was irritated because everybody was putting basement suites in these duplexes, making them into fourplexes.
I see.
So what they did is they said, okay, we're going to allow you to subdivide all the duplex lots that are 66 feet or larger. So I bought about 8 of these lots with the idea of subdividing them and selling them. Well,
Okay.
that's when the first interest rate started, and then the city went on strike for 6 months, so I couldn't get it done. Meanwhile, the economy was going in the toilet. Real estate was dropping like a rock.
You were nervous.
Oh, it's terrible. And in fact, I had a partner, and he just said, I give up. What am I going to do? Well, they happened to have a thing the year before called MURBs, multiple unit residential building. They're trying to encourage people to build rentals because Vancouver is growing very quickly. So the year before it was just booming, but this year was terrible. But because income tax runs a year behind, people still were making a lot of money. So I ended up building MURBs on these duplex lots because they're duplex. You
Right.
could build a MURB. And what I did is made them into all fourplex. Of course, the city wasn't too happy about that because that's exactly what they were trying to stop. But it worked financially extremely well. So when the market was really bad, other people couldn't sell things. I was buying the duplex lots and building these MURBs, and I had people all pre-selling or pre-sold, and worked out very well.
Well, good for you. I mean, I'll never forget your adage follows a little bit with Warren Buffett's, I mean, do the exact opposite of what everyone else is doing. And you've always said, it's instilled in my mind, that when everybody's buying, you sell, and when everybody's selling, you buy. It does take a contrarian theory and a lot of confidence and other resources to do that, but you found your way through a difficult part of the market. And it's interesting to me also, but that's the very policies that we're now imposing with House Bill 1110 here in Washington State, and certainly throughout the Lower Mainland up in Vancouver. I mean, they're adding ADUs and DADUs, these auxiliary units, like wherever they can, to create more housing, because as we've learned, there's an affordable housing crisis and we can't build new construction affordably, and as a result, prices go up. So it's so interesting. That was 45 years ago. So speaking about policy and maybe a little politics in Canada, we're in the early 80s, and I believe it wasn't too long before you decided to look south of the border into Washington State. You were exploring some other markets in the US. Was that your first entree to international investment?
No, actually, when I was teaching, I took 1 year out and moved the family down to California and taught for 1 year in Monterey, California, returned back. Well, when I flew down to take a look at the school, I was reading a magazine. They said the best investment in the U.S. was the Eugene Springfield area in Oregon, and second best was Seattle. And I thought, I'm going to take a look at this. So I went down to Seattle, and we ended up buying a 23-suite apartment building on Capitol Hill called Anaron Apartments. Mm-hmm. And it was actually pretty big, 2 big penthouses and quite large units. And I think we paid $15,000 a unit, which is just, who could ever believe it?
$15,000 a unit? Sign me up for that one.
So that turned out to be very good over the next few years because the prices went crazy. And anyway, we did very well at that.
And what was driving your interest to diversify into the United States? Were there policies that you were less interested in participating in with Canada, or you just wanted to distribute your resources into multiple markets?
Canadian market became more left-wing socialistic. Restrictions and problems. And when one government got elected, I went, no, these guys are scary. So I'd been down in Seattle already, so I knew it pretty well. So I decided to come to Seattle, and because I'd been dealing with some apartments and that, I ended up buying apartment buildings and renovated and resold them, or then we started building new things like Concord, which was twin tower high rises. And
that delivered in 2001. But let's back up. So now we're in the late 80s. You're investing more and more in the Seattle metro area. I recall also, because I was in high school working with you on the side, and we were converting office into residential, and I think there was a moratorium that went on there. There was just a lot of more controls over what you could do, and it wasn't until the early 1990s that I got more involved with you in the business and was sort of tapped. You said, hey, you have no encumbrances, you have a pickup truck, here's a checkbook, why don't you go down there and see what you can do with this 16-unit apartment building. That was in about 93, 94, the Alexander Apartments on Bellevue on Capitol Hill. And do you recall, on the heels of that, there was a pretty good boon of other Canadian investors that followed along suit with you. The Electra Apartments, which was formerly known as the Townhouse Apartments. I think your original play was that was going to be the eastern expansion of the convention center, which ultimately went north. Do you recall what your decisions were at that point? Because
one of the best and easiest ways to make money in real estate is trying to predict the future. And if you can figure out areas that are going to be redeveloped and the price often goes up 2 or 3 times with very little work, well, when we bought the Electra apartment, well, what was it called?
The Townhouse Apartments at the time, yeah.
Yeah, they were enlarging the convention center, and it looked like they were going to go across the street on, was it Hubble?
Yeah.
And they would probably take over late 50s high-rise building, and if they did that, of course, it would probably more than double. So that's why we bought it. But unfortunately, they didn't. They went the other way. So we took it and renovated it and sold it off as condominiums.
And that's where I cut my teeth in marketing. And that was a lease up. I was living in the building, and I'm in my early 20s in this America, and enjoying this renaissance of residential living in downtown Seattle. And I think Vancouver always had, what would you say, a 10 or 15 year advance on this notion of residential, like the West End, and how you saw eventually Concord Pacific go in place in False Creek, and just so much urban living. And that was, I think, in part modeled after our experience from Asian investment, right, and higher density lifestyles that were coming in. That started with the 1986 World Fair, when Vancouver kind of became alive and aware.
It did.
And then what happened in 97, and tell me what went on with your business back then.
I got kind of into very high-end homes, mostly kind of equate what it would be now, but they would be homes now in Vancouver that would be $18-20 million. At that time, they might have only been 4, 5, 6 million, but they went up so much in value that they became, closer to 20 million. So I got kind of into that, and a lot of people up to that point were in this Shaughnessy area, which was, I don't know what's equal to it here.
I would say in the Seattle, Bellevue metro area. In Seattle, it would be more your Madison Park, Denny Blaine. So it's the Blue Bloods of Seattle. And on the east side, it would be your Medina, Clyde Hill area.
What was happening were these were older buildings built in the late 20s, early 30s, and the layout of them wasn't great for a new way you lived. What did they do is they have more space to entertain. They put bigger living rooms. They didn't really do family rooms, and they didn't so much do multiple bathrooms for each bedroom, etc. So people were renovating them and trying to make them work.
Right.
Well, I decided that I did a big shovel renovation, just basically tore them down.
A big shovel renovation.
and quite frankly, some of the neighbors were a little upset with me at the beginning. But what happened was that they sold like hotcakes because everything was new to start with. This is the days when some of the buildings were built in the early 20s, and some of the foundations were they would throw boulders in the concrete just to fill the foundation up. So they kind of leaked. In fact, they used to put the basement's floors on a bit of an angle, so if any water got in there,
Wow.
it would actually drain to the lowest spot. Well, over the years, people wanted more space, so they renovated the basements and put in recreational rooms and that, but they tended to be lower ceilings and they have pipes in the way. Well, when you started new, now I can have 8, 9, 10-foot ceilings. Pipes are totally other way. Everything is new. So when I did this, it kind of opened up a whole new reality to what people wanted. So after a while, I had quite a bit of competition. Other people were doing it because the demand was there. Then during the transition from Hong Kong, and I guess it was 97, a lot of Chinese came before that.
Yeah.
Well, they loved these new houses. They didn't want old houses. Old houses had old ghosts. And they wanted these new houses. So I could build them and sell them very easily to very wealthy Chinese.
And from Hong Kong and elsewhere in the Pacific Rim, but there was a massive relocation at the time. They had a visa program, as I recall, that if you invested so many dollars, you would be granted a Canadian visa. And let's be honest, the Canadian government has always been in the business of immigration, and they certainly enjoyed a boom of Asia Pacific investment and immigration. And that was largely a wave that you were able to ride for, 20, 30 years of home building.
Absolutely.
And one referral led to another, and before you knew it, you were changing entire neighborhoods, and I don't think you ever spoke Mandarin or Cantonese.
A little bit.
You did very well, and I think that says something about seeing where the market's going next, and also, really doubling down to be part of that. So this is your home building, new construction, single family business. You also bought and sold numerous apartment buildings. I was fascinated by this. The audience could appreciate that when you become an expert in a subject matter, sometimes people will contact you to figure out what something might be worth, and you're like, it's worth what I'm willing to pay for it. Maybe I'll just buy that right now. Did you find yourself with this little black book of business opportunities? And
I did. In fact, I still remember a couple of times I was trying to buy a piece of property, and somebody found out I was trying to buy it, and they said, well, if Trevor Jones wants to buy it, I want to buy it. So I didn't get it. Anyway, whatever. But you're right about the apartment buildings. I saw the opportunity. When the Chinese influx came, a lot of them made their money in real estate in Hong Kong. The prices in Hong Kong went crazy. So they came to Vancouver and they wanted apartment buildings. Well, most apartment buildings around Vancouver at that time were probably built in the late 50s, 60s, and 70s. So they tend to be, they weren't run down, but they weren't real modern. And they didn't want, the Chinese were real picky, just like they wanted a new house. They wanted better apartment buildings. And nobody was really building new much. So I'd buy apartment buildings and then do a quick renovation, carpets, fridges, stoves, countertops, a few things like that, and then resold them. But I worked two angles. It got to the point I was buying a lot, so all the agents would bring them to me before anybody else. And I still remember learning that I remember competing against an accountant. He was going to buy this apartment building that came for sale. And I saw his offer, and his offer had like maybe 18 contingents, typical accountant booked for this and all, costs and that. Well, I knew these buildings like the back of my hand. So I had one subject, inspection. So even if I wasn't the lowest price or the highest price, they would always counter me because I would have one inspection, because I knew what I was doing. I knew what you could do with the building. I knew what it was worth. So between agents bringing me all these buildings, it got to a point where I had a folder, and I now started to have agents phone me, well, I got these Chinese people, they want to buy a 35-unit apartment building in a place called South Granville. Have you got anything like that? And I said, well, I got a 32-unit apartment building, but I haven't redone it yet. They don't care. They just want the building. So, okay, fine. I just marked it up and sold it. And it was like shooting, ducks in a barrel. It was pretty easy.
Phenomenal, but to put yourself in that position. Now we're moving through the 90s at the same time that we were active in the Seattle area, and with our business partners, we were down there developing high-rise new construction after finishing a conversion of that Electra apartment building, which was a successful operation, and then that was converted as condominiums. And I remember standing on the rooftop with you, and you were heralded by the media with Daily Journal of Commerce as being sort of a renaissance man for downtown Seattle's revival. And truly, there was not, prior to the Concord, any seriously successful pre-sale condominiums. And it wasn't until the Concord came along and the great work we did back then with Cliff Bowman and Leslie Williams. This was 1997, and it delivered in 2000. And that was the first broadly respected, successful pre-sale condominium high-rise in the Seattle area. And obviously this was after a lot of economic boom with Microsoft, and Amazon was just getting on its legs. Do you recall then things changed after 9/11, and it was a matter of minutes, quite literally, before the market reacted, and you had some big decisions to make. You had some other high-rise lots tied up right? 3rd and Virginia. We had the 1420 Terry Avenue behind the Electra. And I think you just flipped those off, and I think you brought in another Canadian developer to go forward with the one behind the Electra. And I would say that was largely your exit from any new development.
It was. What happened was I did the Electra. There was a big parking lot at the back, and I kind of came to the conclusion that this was downtown right next to the convention center. And I thought, well, maybe if I could build a new building on this big parking lot and put extra parking to replace the parking from what at that time was the townhouse apartments. Anyway, I took it to the city, and the city said, sure. So I did it. But I was getting kind of concerned about, quite frankly, being a target. And the situation with the legal department down here has just got to be terrible.
Yeah, a little more litigious than Canada, for sure.
Oh, absolutely terrible. So I decided I didn't want to continue doing it.
But we did act on one policy. We got that upzoned. I was very proud of that work, from 16 stories to 24 stories.
That, yeah.
And that was with Capitol Hill Housing Improvement. And that was the opportunity to create more affordable housing. And so again, uniquely, you were able to see high-rise development opportunity on what was otherwise a surface parking lot, right? And you had to take parking away from your residents that you sold to at the Electra, which they knew about, but you replaced it with an upgraded underground parking, and then rising out of the ground is this 24-story luxury condominium development, and you were able to participate on the backside of that one without taking the development risk. And then I think it was largely just you developing new construction and flipping a few apartment buildings now and again throughout the early 2000s and into the last decade. And now here we sit largely in retirement. And not before my sibling, Cameron Jones, has taken the reins of T. Jones Enterprises. And are you still, actively involved in the business? Are you feeling?
Not now, but what I found was that when I was buying and selling apartment buildings, I kept some. And literally over 25 years, they all went up at least 10 times. But the good point is, you invest in an apartment building, it might be a little bit of a stretch at the beginning, kind of subsidizing the income. But once you get into it and the rents go up a bit, as long as interest rates don't go up too much, before long it starts to pay for itself, then it starts to make money, and then I'm talking about cash flows. And then, of course, cash flows better and better over time until, you go to sell it, and literally sold for close to 10 times what I paid for them.
Well, I remember some of those buildings, like on Nelson Street, that one apartment building that I renovated probably half of those units myself, and lived in that very happily, in my early 20s before moving down to the Seattle area. And that was one of your last holdings, because now here you are, with retirement and estate planning, and I know tax policy changes in Canada also have you kind of shaking your head a little bit. I mean, it's not getting any easier to live up there, is it?
No, they tax you to death, quite frankly.
And is it true that capital gains taxes were just arbitrarily raised with 1 month notice?
Correct.
I mean, give us some perspective on what that means for moving the goalposts when you're in the middle of a real estate transaction.
Well, the government is bad for a lot of these things. They stop some Airbnb after some people built buildings specifically to have Airbnb. And then the government said, no, you can't do it anymore. You have to rent by the month because there was a shortage of accommodation. Of course, that's totally unfair.
For investors that are speculating on one business opportunity to have the goalposts change, especially short notice, I mean, that is a challenge of doing business in Canada. That's the challenge of doing business in a lot of different countries. Fortunately, in the United States, we have a constitution, we have other guardrails, I'll call it, about certain decision making. It's a little more difficult to impose those kinds of major changes, although it is happening more and more.
Well, I see it. I watch the news. In the U.S., they're doing more and more policies to, quite frankly, punish people who are successful, which is a real bad thing to do, because you don't have the successful people who make the economy work, who hire the people,
right,
etc., and pay the taxes. What have you got? You got nobody paying the taxes, and you got nobody working. So punishing the wealthy is a big mistake.
I mean, seeing around the corner has always been one of your hallmarks of opportunity, and the Seattle area in a lot of ways is reminiscent of Vancouver, right? It's a working downtown. There's a lot of commuting challenges with waterways and tunnels and bridges and hills and such. I mean, why were you so confident that downtown Seattle would have a residential revival?
Because of the traffic problems, Seattle was getting worse and worse for people having to drive from outlying districts to work downtown. You know, if you spend an hour driving to and from each day, wouldn't it be nice if you could have a nice condo with a nice view, with parks around it, waterfront, etc.? So that's when we did the Concord Twin Towers. And it was pretty successful, sold out very quickly, and quite frankly, you could come home in 5 minutes, you know, maybe walk or take a bus and be home, didn't have to fight the traffic, and good restaurants downtown. You walk down to the waterfront, and, you know, it kind of worked, and it kind of has been a bit of a renaissance down here.
Well, and that was the beginning of a lot of other investments you made downtown. I mean, you were renovating apartment buildings, and now some of the brokers that you used to work with back then that were bringing you properties actually followed your lead and have become very successful, owning huge portfolios of apartment buildings.
I remember telling a few of them, you know, when I was doing it, I said, you know, you're well connected to the business. Why don't you buy yourself a couple of apartment buildings? You know, good investment, and they did.
Well, and downtown Seattle has obviously had its bumps and bruises over the pandemic and some political dysfunction, which is unfortunate, but it's certainly in recovery now. We have a beautiful new waterfront that's reminiscent of the Embarcadero in San Francisco. I'm not sure it's quite Vancouver's vision with the seawall and such, but it's darn close and much better than, you know, a double-decker viaduct with noisy traffic. The new convention center is extraordinary. We're getting light rail, which is literally 40 years after some of the original plans for light rail in the region, unlike SkyTrain in Vancouver, BC, that was a little more progressive, you know, leading into the Expo 86. Because what happened now, everywhere that SkyTrain stops, describe what kind of environment, you know, we now see there.
Well, the idea is that wherever the SkyTrain goes, at each station in the surrounding area, the government has allowed multi-level buildings, well, be high-rise mostly. And the idea is that you can get on the SkyTrain, go to work, and come home and get off, and you don't have to really have a car. And in fact, it's kind of interesting. My wife and I, about 3 weeks ago, decided we would try taking the SkyTrain out to a place called Surrey, which is outlying area of Vancouver, which if you wanted to drive there because of traffic, it would probably take you, well, in rush hour, it could take you an hour and a half. Even good traffic would be an hour. Well, it took about 20, 25 minutes on the SkyTrain, just relaxing. And when you get off the SkyTrain, there tends to be connecting buses and that pick people up. So I was pretty impressed with it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely is a concept that works, and a lot of Asian and European countries was all built around light rail, and for whatever reason, it just never caught on in the Seattle area. But it finally has with Sound Transit 3. You know, they're laying down 116 miles of track, multi-billion-dollar investment that will fundamentally change the way development is observed and the way that people will live in our region. Describe for our audience what's happening along all the major arterials in the Lower Mainland, specifically in South Vancouver, and you know what we might see in our future in the Seattle area.
Okay, many of the main streets coming into Vancouver are now multi-family, so there tend to be 5-6-story condos, and now more lately rentals. They're
building more rentals. You know, I was fascinated in the past that there's very little apartment development going on in the Lower Mainland. Like, most of your rental supply are individually owned condominiums that are pre-sold from very sophisticated developers to a very willing investor pool. How is that changing now?
Well, the demand is so great for rentals. The population of Vancouver is increasing very quickly. So the government is doing several things to encourage rentals. They're giving low interest loans. They're still terrible for time to get things approved. It's government bureaucracy everywhere, especially Vancouver, is just outrageously bad.
Looks like it's aging you right before me, Dad.
It is terrible.
You're just entered into your 80s. You've had a more than 45-year meteoric run in development and investment. What's your focus now in retirement, the sunset of life?
Number one, to make sure my 3 children do well, which they're all doing fine, and that is, now we're into philanthropy.
This is the Jones Family Foundation?
Correct.
And how was that conceived? When did it start? About 5-6 years ago?
About that.
And I know Ken Morrison, who's a dear friend and has professionally run his own CPA firm and had provisional charity as well in Canada, kind of introduced you to some of those projects. A big one, I remember taking Cole, my son, 5 years ago to Africa. Share with us what that vision was.
They have a medical dental problem in Africa. They don't have enough dentists, they don't have enough doctors. To get the doctors and the dentists, you have to train them. And the problem was, they didn't have facilities. They had facilities somewhat to train, but they had no accommodation for them. So we built a building right next to the university. Started out just for females, and quite frankly, it was really a huge need for it because, quite frankly, the girls, it was dangerous at nighttime going to and from classes. So the fact that we could have this right next to the university was fantastic, and I think it housed about 400 and some odd students. They charged them a little bit of money. Now what we do with the money that they charge them is we are training people to teach dental hygiene. We've got 4 or 5 trained people, bought a 4-wheel drive, and they go around with books and that, trying to teach mostly mothers how to look after the children's teeth, because they don't really have much knowledge and they don't understand how it helps. So, we're sort of increasing that. And here's a funny one too. Another thing we're doing is teaching beekeeping. First of all, there's a big need for bees all over the world. But beekeeping is not that difficult, but it's a pretty lucrative job. So we're sort of funding beekeepers. In fact, we just bought a piece of land. I'm going to be building a processing plant for processing the honey. Here's an interesting story. So one of the things they do in Africa is they have a problem with elephants. They often come into residential or farming areas, and of course, you want cabbages, go pick a cabbage out. Who's going to stop an elephant? What they found is, to keep the elephants out, what they're afraid of is bees. So what they do is they put beehives around the farm and put a tripwire between the beehives, and when the elephant goes through the tripwire, it disturbs the bees and they come out flying around and they go in the elephant's ears, and the elephants absolutely go crazy. So when there's any bees around, they stay away. So that's how they...
Well, we certainly know an elephant's going to remember that journey, won't they? Well, so here you are in Ifakara in Tanzania, in Africa, and with the Catholic Church there, with the St. Francis University, you've built a dormitory that has successfully housed hundreds of mostly female students successfully. 5 years later now, many of those have graduated, and as part of their commitment, they are also returning to their villages with medical degrees, mostly in dental and also other MD, and doing great work, to help save lives and build dispensaries in other outlying areas. I know that the net revenues for the gift is also providing for other doctors to come in from Canada and train local doctors there to provide full-time service in those dispensaries. And so there's medical work being done virtually every day as a result of the net income from that dormitory.
One of the things I really like to focus on is entrepreneurialism. Until you start teaching people, the saying goes in the Bible, you can give somebody a fish and eat for a day, or you can teach them to fish and they can eat for a lifetime. Well, if they learn how to do entrepreneurialism and, grow some produce and then sell it and make money and get other people involved in it, they'll keep doing it. But if you just give them money to buy vegetables, it's not going to go anywhere. So that's one of my big focuses.
Well, I think it's fascinating that it was a flywheel. It was a sustainable investment that you made that actually is now propagating itself, and you're farming the land and you're talking about adding the bees. They're actually harvesting the land and having a small farm, a retail storefront in front of the dormitory, in front of the school. And so you are getting back to your developer roots. You're just doing it in Ifakara.
So that's your entrepreneurialism. We're giving people, we're loaning them money to buy the seeds, to grow the vegetables, and then they sell them at the store. Then they have to pay back the money, and hopefully they keep making money that way, and they learn how to be entrepreneurs.
So I'm so proud to be a director with the Jones Family Foundation, and recently in 2023 we were able to move outside of some of the Canadian interests into some U.S. and Central American interests through New Story Homes, which is near and dear to my heart and also to that of the Sotheby's International Realty affiliates. There was a $75,000 grant made in 2023 that was part of a matching fund that with our affiliates actually created more than $400,000 of goodwill and opportunity for New Story Homes that year. You've agreed to do that again this year, and we're going to be on a mission to raise $150,000 with that grant in a matching fund. And you'll be satisfied to know that as they are re-engineering with Brett Hagler, with what they're doing as the CEO at New Story Homes, is they're no longer just providing the 3D printed homes, but they're actually underwriting land ownership and basically creating a layaway program for those future land owners to leverage the land equity and build vertical their home. And this is the first step in the ladder of home ownership for many folks that need it so desperately, instead of being constantly relocated and never being given that opportunity to build credit and to establish a home equity, if you will. Quite literally $150,000 this round in 2024 is going to help 150 homeowners step onto the ownership ladders. You know, closer to home, you and Mom have also been very focused with Ronald McDonald House, with Avalon and Covenant House. Do you want to speak to sort of the foundation of that giving and, you know, what's near and dear to you?
We try and focus a little more on the female side of things. One that we give a lot of money to is Avalon Society. It isn't down in the downtown, down and out Skid Row type females. It's more, started off more alcohol issues, families.
Yeah, dependency issues.
Yeah, and
domestic issues.
Broke up families with children and that. So this is counseling and, you know, just help for these types of women. But unfortunately, as society has progressed, it's now probably 50% drug problems and 50% alcohol. But they do a wonderful job.
Changing lives. And then Covenant House?
Okay, that's more for lost youth on the streets. It used to be strictly they could not be on drugs, but now we're funding a new wing which they are on drugs, and that's really challenging, but we're trying.
Yeah, well, it certainly gives them an opportunity to recover, and it's a great effort. We have some local interests here in the Seattle Bellevue area, like Mary's Place, that is very similar to Avalon House and Covenant House in a sense that it's focused around women in need and their families as well. But that definite focus for our brokers here at Realogic Sotheby's International Realty. Well, thank you, Trevor, and to the Jones Family Foundation. This was a very special Market Perspectives. I'm Dean Jones. We look forward to seeing you next time. Please feel free to leave us a comment, follow us on social media. Take care.